My name is Manuel Rustin, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. Welcome to my classroom. This is an all of the above teacher vlog. One of the ongoing challenges in teaching is keeping students engaged. At my school, we're on a block schedule, so our classes are 90 minutes each. And it's really difficult to keep students engaged for the full 90 minutes. It seems, in my own personal experience, like it's becoming more difficult than it used to be. I've been teaching for 15 years, and my students today, it just seems like it's a greater challenge to keep them engaged in the content than my students from 15 years ago. Maybe it's technology. We could blame it on the click, click, buzz, buzz notification world that we live in. Maybe it's just me getting old and looking at these young whippersnappers and wondering why they're not as interested in the content as I am. I don't know what it is, but I do know that as a teacher, there's plenty you could do to foster student engagement. I'm going to tell you about one practice that I use. I use it especially in my hip hop studies class, but I think it applies to a bunch of different classes. So I'll start with a quick disclaimer. If you're looking for a really quick way to use hip hop to engage your students and like come up with some sort of way for them to like write or make some hip hop to learn your calculus formula or your chemistry formula, this isn't really the video for you. Using hip hop in that way, just having students write rhymes to rhyme the content, that might help them remember some of the content in terms of just being able to regurgitate it. But hip hop is really so much more powerful than just the rhyming aspect of it. So in this video, I want to share with you how I use hip hop to really make space for students to be heard and make space for students to ask their own authentic questions to drive instruction on a daily basis. This is something that I do in my hip hop studies class. However, I think it's something that can apply to a lot of other classes, especially at the middle school and high school level. So I'm going to tell you about it. I call it Let's Start the Show. And there's a few different steps to it. I'm going to give you just the basics, and in the future I'll make some videos with more particulars, but of course you can reach out to me if you need those particulars now. But let me take a quick second to talk to you about my hip hop studies course, because it's rather unique and it helps frame sort of the purpose and reasoning for me using this method in the first place. So I'm a high school history teacher. I've taught U.S. history, world history, economics, government, geography. But several years ago, I realized that history as it was scripted and history as it's described in our standards and frameworks really wasn't engaging for a whole segment of my student population, particularly those students who just didn't view school as a place for them, students who didn't view traditional curriculum as being anything that would help them achieve their dreams. So seeing a bunch of students struggle and drift listlessly through their education, I wanted to really think of a way that I could help students see themselves in the curriculum and take charge of the curriculum. So I thought of a hip hop studies course. I grew up on hip hop. I love hip hop. You don't have to love hip hop to take my course. My course is a social science elective. I got it approved for A through G credit. If you are a teacher in California, you know what that means. If you're not, that essentially means that my course is recognized by our California State University system and our University of California system as a course worthy of social science elective credit. So it's a real course that's on their schedule during the school day. It's not an after-school program or a before-school program or a club. Nothing wrong with any of that, but it's actually a rigorous social science course that I teach. And if you know anything about hip hop, you know hip hop is collaborative, hip hop is participatory, and I knew in designing this course that if I was going to really engage these students, I needed to not only help them see themselves in the curriculum, but I needed to enable them to be part of the curriculum and be engaged with the day-to-day process of learning about race and gender and class in modern American history. So I wanted to really break down the barriers of how I normally taught my classes and how I was trained to teach. By that I mean I wanted to break away from any kind of textbook. There wasn't a textbook available for me anyways, but even if there had been, I knew a hip hop studies course couldn't be something that's reliant on a textbook, because students wouldn't be signing up for a hip hop studies course only to be confronted with traditional curriculum and traditional teacher lecture that they were already disengaged from in general in the first place. So I wanted to really challenge myself to make space and make room for students to really run the course and be a big voice and big decision maker in terms of where the course was going to go. In other words, I wanted my course to be flexible, and I wanted my course to be authentic to the students who I have in my class. Now, I happen to teach predominantly students of color. Our school serves a really marginalized population, and we are in a highly segregated city. And I knew that if students came to my class and just saw more mainstream dominant narrative curriculum, they would reject that and just be disengaged. So for this class, one way that I thought to engage students and make sure that I wouldn't fall back on my bad habits of just sticking to like the traditional script was to create a new practice that I ended up calling Let's Start the Show. So the reason why I call it Let's Start the Show is because I really want it to be the foundation from which the rest of the course blooms. And it happens at the beginning of each class period, so it's us really starting the show that is learning through hip hop. When I was originally thinking about it years ago, there was an intro on a Common album called Let's Start the Show. So that was running through my head as I was thinking about how I could have students be the ones who really design this class and really run this class. Now, Let's Start the Show is essentially a student presentation, but it's not really a traditional presentation where a student goes up in front of the class and presents information. Instead, I hand the class over to a student. Students can choose to work by themselves or with a group. And for half of the period, again, I teach on a block schedule, so it's a 90-minute block. For half of that time, 45 minutes, the group of students runs the class, like they run it. And I asked the student groups to come up with their own warm-up questions, which they project on the screen. So as students walk in, there's a do now, I call it a do now, on the screen, and students create the questions. They make the slide, and I put up what they make. So if it's a trash slide with trash font and color scheme, they're going to see how it doesn't work. So hopefully that's a learning experience for them going forward with presentations. But students walk in, the group has its questions up on the screen, and the group walks around and answers any questions that students may have. They make sure everybody has what they need, and students respond to the questions on the screen. So this recent Let's Start the Show, the questions dealt with prejudice and discrimination. So that's what the student group wanted to talk about. In our current climate of just increased overt bigotry and racism and xenophobia, students really wanted to take a moment to really reflect on how it's impacting them and impacting their classmates. So that's what they decided that they wanted their Start the Show to be about. So that topic obviously fits fine in a hip hop studies course, since we study matters of race and gender and class and recent American history. But I think that works in most other courses as well, because it's very hard to take away race and gender, prejudice and discrimination from any particular subject area. And especially at the middle and high school level, that's something that I think you can incorporate into your class, no problem. But again, students choose the topic. I didn't tell them, let's have a class discussion about prejudice and discrimination. They came up with that, and they created the questions that they wanted students to respond to in writing before taking it to the next level. So the first level is responding to the do now questions. And the questions that this group came up with dealt with students' individual experiences with prejudice and discrimination. They asked students if they felt that they were held to a higher standard because of their appearance, and they kept it really wide open. They just said, based on your appearance. So that could include all sorts of things. So some students wrote about race, some about gender. One wrote about like just how they happen to dress and how they're judged or perceived based on how they dress. So when the students are finished writing their responses to the do now question, then the group facilitates a discussion among the whole class. My class happens to be pretty large, it's 37 students, but facilitating a discussion of 37 teenagers isn't too difficult when you've already established a climate of respect and care and love and collaboration in your room. So students do a really good job of making it easier for their classmates, their peers who are presenting, making it easier for them by volunteering, by avoiding side conversations, by staying engaged with the discussion. And the group that's facilitating the discussion, they're not just calling on people, but they're also responding to what's being said, and they're pushing the discussion forward and trying to come up with questions on the fly so that students could dive deeper into the topic. For this particular topic of prejudice and discrimination, obviously the discussion was pretty heavy. Hearing from students, most of my students are students of color, most of my students come from marginalized backgrounds, and having a discussion about prejudice and discrimination could be quite heavy. And especially hearing students share about being perceived a certain way. We live in a highly segregated city, so as our students go out for internships or go across town for different meetings and functions, oftentimes they find themselves being one of the only students of color in the room. And some students shared about that. So heavy discussion, and you think, yeah, we could just end it right there, right? The group came up with questions, they had the class respond to the questions, they facilitated a discussion, perfectly fine, performance task right there. But that's just the beginning of it. The next step is to introduce a song to the class with the intent of using that song to take us deeper into the discussion and analysis of the topic. So the song that this group chose is a song called Be Free by J. Cole. If you haven't heard Be Free by J. Cole, there's a link to it in the description. It's a very powerful song that was written shortly after the murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson. So in the song, J. Cole essentially cries out for freedom.
Break the chains off it. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is take the chains off. All we want to do is break the chains off it.
So students use the song to drive the class deeper into a discussion of prejudice and discrimination because they felt that this song really helped capture the effect and the impact that discrimination has on a person's social emotional well-being. So Be Free was written and performed by J. Cole shortly after the murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. J. Cole, who's normally a rapper, in this song, he doesn't rap very much, he sings. And the lines compared to his normal songs are quite simple, very repetitive actually. He repeats, all we want to do is be free, all we want to do is break the chains off. And he repeats that, and as he repeats that, he includes audio of witness accounts of the Mike Brown shooting. It's a very deep song, it's a very painful song, and students chose this song to take the class deeper into the discussion of prejudice and discrimination, to push it past experiences or examples of prejudice and really take it to a place of how prejudice and discrimination really impacts somebody's social and emotional well-being. Whatever song is being presented by the group, I supply printed lyrics to that song so the class can annotate and use the text as their evidence for what they shared during the discussion. So what students annotated and what students discussed after hearing the song really focused and honed in on this concept of breaking the chains and what are chains and why is J. Cole repeating that consistently and constantly throughout the song. Some students referred to the chains as systems and structures in place that hold people of color back. Some students referred to the chains as negative expectations of Black Americans. Some students wrote that the chains represented being chained up by inequality and discrimination. And the point of a Let's Start the Show isn't to just say, hey, look at this cool song, I want you to check it out, don't you like the song? No, it's to use the song to take us deeper into the topic that was introduced through the Do Now questions. And those discussions run quite a long time because when you're combining what was previously discussed in the written warm-ups to what's added by the song or the video. Some cases the discussion is simply about the visual images being presented in the song's music video. There's a lot to say and there's a lot to share. And students really get into it because, again, they see themselves in the curriculum. During this particular exercise, students really were able to dive deeper into race in America. And a lot of students, this was 2014 when the song came out. That's 5 years ago. To me, I remember it like it was nothing, the Mike Brown killing in Ferguson. But my students, they were middle schoolers. Some might have been in 5th or 6th grade at that time. So to them, like they perhaps didn't quite understand what was happening at the time. And to explore it through this song, with student moderators, student facilitators, was something that really drove their learning. So this discussion about prejudice and discrimination, particularly using this song, really helps students critically explore how racism bears an emotional toll on people. Because this song was really just all heart being laid out, despair being laid out for not just the killing of Mike Brown, but the 400 years of racial oppression in this country. And I can tell you right now, students were fully engaged. Again, I was in the back the whole time. I did toss in my 2 cents about particular lines in the song, but for the most part, students were they were running their own class for 45 minutes. After the class discussion, the group gives its final thoughts, and then, we give it up for the group and they have a seat. And so this discussion using J. Cole's Be Free was a heavy discussion about race in America. Other discussions aren't as heavy, but they are all as engaging. So another Start the Show recently dealt with infidelity. Yes, infidelity. Is that academic? Is that rigorous? What are you doing? Well, actually, it employed a tremendous amount of academic skills, not just annotating the lyrics for the song and using the text as evidence for their claims that they were making during discussion, but also, of course, the facilitators having to facilitate a class period, come up with questions for class discussion, moderate discussion between groups, respond to different ideas, challenge certain ideas, all of this thinking on their feet. But in addition to all that, it really gives students a chance to discuss the things that are on their mind constantly. One reason why students are disengaged from school is that they feel like school doesn't matter, or school isn't speaking to what's on their heart and on their mind at that moment. So having a Start the Show allows students to practice their presentation skills, their conversation skills, practice using text-based evidence for supporting their claims, all that while also speaking to their immediate concerns and giving them space and giving them a voice and helping them see that school is for them, that class is for them, that this curriculum is for them. If you want your students to be engaged, you have to make room for them. Your class can't just be all about you. You have to make room for students to be able to bring themselves into the class, especially if your curriculum isn't already reflecting them. All right, so for me, Start the Show allows them to bring something that they're already interested in into the class and discuss with others. One of the biggest mistakes that I see teachers make is to assume that students aren't really bringing anything into the classroom with them regarding skills and so-called cultural capital. There's this really harmful deficit mindset that views students of color as young people who don't really know much and don't have many skills, and teachers believe that it's their job to teach them these skills and help them learn the classics and how to navigate in the so-called real world, as if the students themselves don't already have a wealth of strength, a wealth of capital that they bring into the classroom. So if you are of the mindset that your students really aren't bringing anything and that hip hop it's just loud music, then I highly recommend you read Whose Culture Has Capital by Tara Yoso. It's a research article that really lays out the different forms of community cultural wealth that students of color bring with them into your classroom. And as a teacher, if you don't acknowledge those strengths and if you don't give room for students to use those strengths and bring their strengths to the forefront in your room, then you're really doing a disservice to your students. And to me, that's the magic of Let's Start the Show. And I think it can be used in any class beyond just my hip hop studies class. Any topic that comes up in any of your classes, there's no reason why students couldn't explore that through music. And it doesn't have to be rap music. It could be any kind of music or poetry. I've had Start the Shows that were based on spoken word poetry. I've had a few Start the Shows that were based on written poetry that wasn't performed. All that still works. I just give the space for them to use music as a guide because, for one, they love music and what's not engaging about listening to music and analyzing lyrics. But also, it just makes it a little more fun. And additionally, music, particularly hip hop in my opinion, has so much depth to it, and there's so much to discuss and unpack in an average rap song, even songs that you think are just baseless radio pop hits. There's always something to piece apart and unpack. Now, in my hip hop studies course, I don't give too many constraints as to what songs they can use. Some of you are wondering, well, what about the lyrics? What about all the explicit language in there? In my particular course, I have their parents and guardians sign waivers, and I communicate with them about what we're listening to, because I don't like to stick to just censored music, because that takes a lot out of the spirit and the soul of the song. So parents are on board. They understand that students are going to hear some language that isn't typically allowed in a schoolhouse, but it's being analyzed with academic intent. And obviously you could put constraints on the songs that they bring in and pull up the clean versions, or just restrict them to only songs that are clean in the first place. I teach juniors and seniors. They've heard it all. They're the ones bringing in the music. I'm not introducing them to the music. They're bringing it in. And their parents are on board. Their parents understand. Thankfully, I have a supportive district administration as well, so we don't have any problems there. But if you have middle schoolers, then I see definitely room for concern there, so obviously lay some constraints out for what music they could bring in. So as this vlog continues, I'm sure I'll share particular discussions being had, but this video is more about just sort of how I use hip-hop to engage students and how I use the Let's Start the Show structure to do that. And I'll add, it doesn't always work. If a group is unprepared, if a group has questions that are unclear, if a group is picking a topic that has been discussed so much that there's really not much more to add, then those presentations will fall flat, and that happens. Your lesson plans fall flat sometimes. I know my lesson plans fall flat, and it's a learning experience. It's a learning experience for students. That rarely happens where there's just a catastrophic failure, but even when there is, I definitely jump in and help students out some. Not jump in by getting in front of the class and moderating discussion, but posing some questions or clarifying some of the questions that are on the screen so that the rest of the class understands what the group is trying to ask. If you're particularly interested in this sort of practice, then just message me. I have documents I could share. I have scaffolds I designed for students that you could take a look at if you're really interested. All right, so thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and drop some comments down there. Let me know what you think. Again, reach out to me if you want more specifics about Let's Start the Show. If you have some thoughts about it, I'm happy to hear them. I've heard every criticism there is about it. Trust me, I've received plenty of negative feedback from folks who aren't in the class, who think that using hip hop in an academic class is just like the worst thing ever. So I don't need to hear any of that. I've already heard it. Trust me. Thank you for joining me in my classroom. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss full episodes of All the Above or future installments of Rustin's Room. Thank you.